Now, this might seem like a bit of a funny thing to do, especially since there won't actually be any speeches at your wedding, but I've been struggling to let my oldest and best friend get away without having a best man speech. Now, I have to say firstly that whilst I completely understand why you have chosen to tie the knot in this way, I'm sorry that I won't be able to be there in person and share the day with you. When I say that I understand, what I mean is that I can see through your excuses. I can appreciate how hard it would be for you to enjoy your own reception meal knowing that you had to pay for everybody else's. The second that I feel I need to do is to acknowledge that this is quite presumptuous of me. I know that you are lucky enough to have an array of wonderful friends, and with good reason, any one of which I'm sure would have made a very proud best man. But let's face it, to be honest, the only reason they would want to be your best man, Rich, is just on the off chance that you didn't show up and they might get to marry Ellie in your place. However, in the absence of an actual service, I figure that a self-nomination is more than acceptable. So on with the formalities. Don't the bridesmaids look pretty? That was a heartfelt expression of your undying love for your new wife, Richard, and wasn't the father of the bride rude about your thinning hair, Rich? I first met Richard Edward Merrills at the age of 3. Our parents both belonging to the local round table and ladies' circle groups. Rich was always much brighter than me, and I always trusted his command of arithmetic. So for the first few years of our relationship, I believed I was actually older than him. Fortunately, he had made a minor miscalculation, and eventually it came to light that I was actually 6 months younger. Over the years, I found this very comforting, especially as we got older. Having Rich stressing about getting older and reaching particular milestones has meant that I've always had an extra 6 months to get used to the idea. Rich's mathematical abilities first came to light to me in primary school. I was searching for a way to get better maths results, and I noted that Stephen Billum, who sat next to Rich, always got really good marks. So I therefore cunningly hatched a plan to sit next to Steve and copy. Unfortunately, this move meant Rich sitting somewhere else. Needless to say that when Steve and I both plummeted to an all-time low marks, it didn't take long to figure out the common denominator. So in sixth form, I seized the opportunity to sit next to Rich in maths again. The only thing I remember about this was that we didn't actually get much maths done. It was about this stage that we discovered that we could form quite a successful double act. Rich was still quite a shy young man, but with a tremendous quick and funny wit. I, on the other hand, didn't seem to have a shy bone in my body, but lacked material. So Rich would feed me the wisecracks and retorts. I would deliver them to the amusement of the class and to the bemusement of our parents at parents' evening. Rich features in so many of my favourite childhood memories, from mountain bike adventures to building makeshift tandem BMXs, which I don't seem to remember that one actually went so well. Carving our names at the top of the tallest tree in the neighbourhood, Nesta's fabulous cooking, our Duke of Edinburgh's expeditions and other camping trips. The heaviest rain I ever remember in my life on the Yorkshire Dales trip. Rich and I just couldn't stop laughing. Rich was an early bloomer, so to speak, and towered above so many of his peers. He was certainly much taller than me, which made us quite a comical duo in the three-legged race. Regardless of how we looked, though, we was quite a formidable team, and to this day remain undefeated. Obviously, at some point we discovered and explored the pastime of drinking. It was at one of Rich's parents' New Year's parties that, by watching Tony Hall, we discovered that it was possible to drink more than 10 pints of beer in one sitting, a feat we eventually emulated ourselves after some practice. Another poignant moment coming when Bruce decided it was time to teach us to drink whisky properly by holding it under our tongues and sucking air through it. Still not quite sure what his intentions were, but man, it got us pissed. Obviously, there were many funny drunken occasions, but a couple really spring to mind. The first being Richard's belief that regardless of how much we drank, he could disguise his level of intoxication by eating a packet of polo mints before he went home. When confronted by Bruce, he obviously soared through the sniff test, but tripped up with his word choice by admitting that I had been sober. This wasn't the only time Bruce caught us out. Still to this day, I'm not sure whether he actually knew that we'd been out in Hull at a nightclub at the age of 15, or whether he just called our bluff. Bruce. I also remember fleeing from the police for some reason. I don't think we'd done anything wrong, but we were on our way walking home from Beverley. As luck would have it, though we were so drunk that whilst we thought we were running like Linford Christie, the police officer on foot and walking behind us was able to keep up quite easily. We therefore changed tact and decided to hide. Again, in our impaired state letters down, and we chose a hedge that was about waist height, and we forgot to duck down. Let's just say that the Yorkshire Police Force didn't have to call in Inspector Garrett to solve this complicated crime. Again, pretty much all of our teenage life events we shared. Rich was kind enough to give me my first driving lessons in his dad's Renault. Unfortunately, we didn't manage to travel more than about 10 metres. Under Rich's careful guidance and expert tuition, I managed to take off with the most vigorous sequence of bunny hops, which I simply couldn't stop. Turning to Rich for guidance, I found that he was laughing so uncontrollably he couldn't talk. There ended the lesson. Not particularly PC in this circumstance to talk about Rich's exploits with the opposite sex. So it's actually quite fortunate that growing up there really wasn't anything to talk about. For a long time there was part of me that thought he might be gay. I guess I was close. As it turns out, he was just picky and was going to have to look further afield than East Yorkshire for a wife. It came as no surprise when I eventually met Ellie, and I would use this run-in to make a comment about how beautiful she looks today, which obviously I'm sure is the case, but you're on some desert island. I do find some irony in this match though, and I know Ellie is from Belgium, but I clearly remember Rich swearing in our last ever French class before we set our GCSEs that under no circumstance was he ever going to speak French again. I also remember in one lesson, after having some assistance from our French teacher, Rich turned to me and whispered under his breath, "Her breath stinks," only to find that after helping him, she'd moved to assist me. So Rich actually whispered his thoughts directly in her ear and not mine. I don't think that helped his marks much. Rich did eventually develop some ability to talk to women, though admittedly only really after a few drinks. It was during a trip to visit me in Brisbane that he was kind enough, in fact, to introduce me to my own wife, Michelle. Obviously, Rich being much more handsome than me, things could have worked out quite differently. But, fortunately, Michelle made the mistake of asking Rich what he did for a living. and he told her. And luckily, I had just had my tonsils out, so I couldn't actually talk, a contrast which appears to have worked in my favour. Thanks, Rich. Rich demonstrated his friendship in numerous ways during that trip. I especially remember his thoughtfulness, knowing how much I liked chili sauce and jalapenos. He asked for extra on my Subway sandwich, which, had I not had my tonsils out 4 days previously, I would obviously have loved. I guess I should start wrapping up now. Can't really go on for too long in a speech for an audience that, strictly speaking, doesn't exist. But before I propose a toast, I would just like to say how proud I am of you, mate. Not that I ever doubted that you would be successful, but still it's great to see you doing well in all aspects of your life. Today is another example of that as you move forward in your partnership with Ellie. I've only had the pleasure of meeting Ellie once, but I have to say that there wasn't an ounce of surprise in me when you finally got your shit together and proposed. You make a wonderful couple, and I look forward to getting to know you both better as Mr. and Mrs. Merrills. Before I finish, though, a couple of words of advice to Ellie. I'm sure by now you realise that you're going to have your work cut out. Rich can be difficult to get along with. He can be stubborn. As all Yorkshiremen will often tend to communicate without words, or body language, or any other gestures. To an outsider, this will seem completely retarded. But you will find that if you nod your head slightly and say, "aye," he will understand completely. Don't let him drink too much red wine, especially if you're planning to start a family. And Rich, just on that point, just be wise to what's going on when you actually have some children, and you notice your doting wife is kind enough to pour you a nice big glass of Shiraz every night when you get home from work. I know Rich's general knowledge, Mez facts are boring, Ellie, but they're important to him. So remember to acknowledge them with a smile and utter, "That is so interesting, Richard. You have an amazing memory," or words to that effect. So, without further ado, I'd like to propose a toast. Wherever you are in the world, I'm sure you will join me as I wish the happy couple all the very best that life has to offer. Friendship, love, happiness, health and wealth. By raising a glass to the bride and groom, Mr. and Mrs. Merrills. Good on you, Snowy.